There comes a moment in your life when staying is no longer strength, it's self-betrayal, and the day you finally walk away from the disrespect, the excuses, the half. Love is the day you stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself. Most people fear losing others, but the real loss is losing your self-respect. So let me tell you why walking away is the most powerful decision you will ever make. Walking away is often misunderstood as a moment of surrender, but in reality, it is the first moment you stop betraying yourself, the moment you choose truth over comfort, and the moment you finally decide that your time, energy, and presence are no longer open for discounting. And it's the line in the sand where you stop waiting for someone else to treat you better and take the responsibility of treating yourself better first. And when you walk away, you are not rejecting a person or a situation. You are rejecting the version of yourself that tolerated what was slowly breaking you. And this is where self-respect begins, because you prove to yourself that you will not remain in places that force you to compromise who you are. And you choose discomfort over disrespect, clarity over chaos, and growth over stagnation. And you demonstrate that your values are not negotiable, and that your identity is not something anyone else gets to define for you. And walking away becomes the moment you reclaim your voice when it has been ignored, your standards when they have been overlooked, and your dignity when it has been questioned. And it is the moment your life shifts from reacting to others' treatment to creating your own boundaries. And people often think boundaries push others away, but in truth, boundaries guard the parts of you that matter most. And by walking away, you tell yourself that you are worthy of the respect you've been waiting for. And the strength to walk away is built long before the moment you take that final step, because it grows quietly in the moments you feel unseen, unheard, or undervalued and choose not to justify it anymore. And you start noticing the small ways you've been shrinking, the subtle ways you've been over-explaining, and the countless moments you've excused disrespect disguised as misunderstanding. And each time you observe these patterns, you gather evidence that staying is costing you more than leaving ever will. And you begin to understand that loyalty without self-respect is not loyalty, it is self-abandonment dressed as patience. And walking away becomes easier when you realize that staying is not an act of strength, but an act of fear. And fear has controlled your decisions long enough. And when you finally choose to walk away, it is not impulsive. It is the conclusion of a courageous internal audit about what you've allowed. And you give yourself permission to stop saving situations that refuse to change and to stop proving your worth to people who never deserved the effort. And in that decision, you elevate your standards from something you preach to something you practice. And you no longer accept apologies without changed behavior or promises without proof. And leaving becomes the ultimate confirmation that you value yourself more than the familiarity of what has been hurting you. And walking away forces you to face who you are without the noise of people who have benefited from your silence. And in that stillness, you rediscover your own voice. And you may feel guilt, confusion, or even loneliness, but these emotions are simply the detox from a space that required you to abandon yourself. And you learn that solitude is not suffering. It is the environment where self-respect finally has room to breathe and take shape. And in quiet moments, you begin recognizing how often you've minimized your needs just to fit into places too small for your growth. And the absence of those who disrespected you becomes the presence of your own clarity. And you realize you needed distance to see the situation for what it truly was. And your mind gets sharper, your emotions get steadier, and your confidence begins to rebuild itself from the inside out. And you understand that being alone is not the worst outcome. Being surrounded by people who make you feel alone is. And this realization turns walking away from something terrifying into something empowering, because you're no longer escaping something, you're moving towards someone, yourself. And you start making decisions based on worth, not fear. And every choice you make reinforces the message that your peace is not up for negotiation. And you discover that your self-respect grows in direct proportion to the standards you uphold, even when no one is watching. And as you walk away, people may accuse you of being too sensitive or too demanding. But those accusations often come from those who benefited from your lack of boundaries. And they project discomfort because your departure exposes the truth they refuse to face, that your presence was never the problem, their behavior was, and your exit becomes a mirror they're forced to look into, and not everyone is ready to confront their reflection. But your goal is not to convince them of your worth. Your goal is to live in alignment with it, and you stop engaging in conversations where you have to explain basic respect, because respect is not something you debate. It's something you require. And you realize that walking away is not about proving a point to others, but proving a promise to yourself, and the promise that you will no longer tolerate environments that ask you to dim your light so someone else can feel comfortable. And the promise that you will prioritize your well-being even if others misunderstand your choice. And the promise that your self-respect is non-negotiable and will not be sacrificed to maintain relationships that cannot handle your strength. And these promises become the foundation of the person you grow into after you walk away. And as time passes, you start recognizing the long-term effects of choosing yourself, because walking away is not merely an act. It is a transformation. And you become someone who no longer chases validation because you've learned to validate yourself through your actions. And you become someone who speaks with more authority because you've removed the people who made you doubt your voice. And you become someone who loves yourself not just in words, but in the decisions you make daily. And walking away teaches you that self-respect is not given. It is earned through consistency, courage, and the willingness to stand alone if needed. And it teaches you that your future is far more important than holding onto a past that kept you small. And you start treating your time as valuable, your energy as sacred, and your presence as a privilege you offer selectively. And you learn that your life expands when you stop shrinking to fit into the expectations of others. And by walking away, you create room for growth, opportunity, integrity, and relationships rooted in mutual respect. And you understand finally that self-respect begins the moment you stop waiting for others to choose you and start choosing yourself first. Growth doesn't happen in the moments that feel easy. It happens in the moments that demand more from you than you want to give, the moments where staying feels safe but leaving feels right. And hard decisions shape the person you're becoming because they force you to let go of the habits, excuses, and patterns that kept you comfortable but stagnant. And you start to see that choosing the harder path is not about punishing yourself, but about elevating yourself to a standard the comfortable version of you could never reach. And the truth is that comfort breeds complacency, and complacency slowly eats away at your confidence without you noticing. And when you make a hard decision, you confront the fear you've been avoiding, and that confrontation becomes the proof that you're capable of more than you thought. And these decisions strip away the layers of doubt and hesitation that you've collected over the years, and they remind you that bravery is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act while holding it. And every time you choose growth over comfort, you give yourself evidence that you're strong enough to honor your own potential, and you begin to understand that the path to self-respect is paved with choices that challenge your character, discipline, and resilience. And in making those choices, you stop hoping for a better life and start building one. And there is always a moment before the breakthrough where everything feels heavy, where the weight of change feels too much to carry, and where the fear of failure whispers louder than your desire for growth. And this is the moment where most people stay where they are, telling themselves it's not the right time or not worth the risk. But that moment is exactly where your future is shaped. And walking away from what's easy demands that you trust yourself even when the outcome is uncertain. And that trust is the birthplace of self-respect. And you begin to realize that the discomfort you feel is not a sign to stop. It's a sign that you're stepping into unfamiliar territory where growth finally becomes possible. And each hard step you take becomes a reminder that you are not designed to settle for the bare minimum version of your life. And you weren't meant to shrink yourself just to avoid friction or hide your potential to avoid criticism. And the hard decision to walk away becomes the lesson that your life moves in the direction of your standards, not your fears. And you begin seeing that the pain of staying small is far greater than the pain of temporary discomfort. And you understand that self-respect isn't earned by waiting for validation, but by acting in alignment with who you aspire to become. And when you choose hard decisions consistently, you transform your life into something you no longer need to escape from. And the comfortable decisions you've made in the past were often rooted in convenience, approval, or habit. But the hard decisions you make now are rooted in intention. And they force you to examine why you've allowed certain behaviors, relationships, or environments to linger longer than they should have. And these decisions push you to admit where you've been lying to yourself just to keep the peace with others. And walking away becomes the evidence that you're done betraying yourself to maintain comfort that never served you. And you stop giving your time to situations that drain you and giving your energy to people who mistake it for obligation. And you learn that choosing discomfort is choosing growth, and choosing growth is choosing yourself. And every hard decision becomes a deposit into your self-respect bank account, and over time, those deposits turn into unshakable confidence. And you begin to see that the people who truly care for you will respect your boundaries, not resent them. And hard decisions reveal who belongs in your life and who only benefited from your lack of them. And with every choice you make, you reinforce the belief that you are worthy of a life built on intention, not convenience. And when you reflect on the moments that shaped you, you'll realize they were never the easy ones. They were the moments that forced you to rise above your insecurities and step into your power. And this is why self-respect grows from hard decisions, because these decisions demand self-honesty, discipline, courage, and clarity. And they require you to see your value clearly enough to refuse anything that diminishes it. And in choosing the harder path, you train yourself to stop running from discomfort and start using it as fuel. And you begin to see discomfort as a message that your standards are rising, your identity is strengthening, and your vision is expanding. And the more you choose what challenges you, the more you grow into someone who no longer fears change but seeks it. And you stop chasing approval because the approval you gain from yourself becomes far more powerful. And hard decisions create the kind of resilience that makes you unstoppable in every area of your life. And you realize that nothing in your life will change until you change what you're willing to tolerate. And through these choices, you become someone who doesn't just talk about growth, but lives it fully, boldly, and unapologetically. When you raise your standards, the world around you begins to shift, not because it suddenly becomes better, but because you stop accepting what never deserved a place in your life to begin with. And that shift creates a new kind of energy that others can feel even before you speak. And you stop chasing people who only gave you fragments of their effort. And you begin attracting people who show up with full presence because they sense your value. And when you no longer tolerate half-hearted loyalty or inconsistent affection, you naturally make room for those capable of giving more. And your energy stops leaking into situations where you were always the one trying, fixing, or proving, and instead becomes invested in places where reciprocity exists. And people notice when your standards elevate because your behavior changes, your time becomes harder to access, your boundaries become clearer, and your tolerance for disrespect becomes non-existent. And what used to drain you no longer even gets a response, and what used to impress you now feels average because you've grown past the level where you once settled. And walking away from what undermines your worth becomes the filter that separates who aligns with you from who doesn't. And it's not about being better than anyone. It's about being better aligned with yourself. And an alignment creates attraction, not in the romantic sense, but in the magnetic sense where like-minded people gravitate toward you because they recognize strength, clarity, and conviction. And your standards become a signal, and the world responds to that signal with opportunities and relationships that match it. And every time you require better from yourself, you unconsciously require better from everything and everyone around you. And this expectation reshapes your environment. And lower standards invite inconsistency, disrespect, and excuses, but higher standards demand accountability, stability, and intention. And the moment you stop accepting minimal effort is the moment you stop receiving it, because the people who relied on your tolerance either rise to meet your level or drift out of your life. And you attract people who want to grow, who want to show up, who want to match the effort you're willing to bring to the table. And this is why Leila emphasizes high standards, not because it's about being picky, but because high standards create a high-quality life. And when you consistently uphold what you're willing to accept, you teach others how to treat you without ever having to explain it. And people sense when you take yourself seriously, and they respond in one of two ways. They step up or they step away. And either outcome elevates your life because losing what doesn't align with your values is never a loss. And as your standards sharpen, your relationships filter themselves automatically, leaving only the ones built on respect, effort, and mutual growth. And the more refined your environment becomes, the more magnetic you become to those who operate at the same frequency. And the process of attracting better is not passive. It is a direct result of becoming better, because attraction is rooted in identity, not desire. And you don't attract what you wish for. You attract what you embody. And when you embody self-respect, confidence, and clarity, the quality of your connections elevates naturally. And people are drawn to certainty, and nothing communicates certainty more powerfully than a person who knows what they will and will not tolerate. And when you show that you're willing to walk away from anything that lowers your value, you become someone others cannot take lightly. And you become someone whose presence feels intentional, whose standards feel non-negotiable, and whose boundaries feel grounded in self-worth. And this kind of person inspires others not because they are perfect, but because they operate with an internal strength that cannot be manipulated. And in every interaction, your energy communicates your standards before your words do, and people respond accordingly. And those who are aligned with your values are drawn closer, appreciating your strength and reciprocating your effort with the same intensity. And those who are not aligned feel uncomfortable because your confidence exposes their inconsistency, and they either elevate or exit. And this natural reorganization of your relationships is the reward that comes from choosing self-respect over acceptance. And raising your standards also transforms the opportunities that come your way because the world reflects the level at which you operate. And when you operate with integrity, discipline, and intention, you become the kind of person people trust with responsibility and opportunity. And doors open not because of luck, but because high standards make you reliable, consistent, and committed, qualities that inevitably attract growth. And you stop accepting roles, environments, and chances that don't align with your future, and in doing so, you create space for the ones that do. And life stops feeling random because you've stopped living reactively. You've begun choosing consciously, and those choices build momentum. And people who once overlooked you begin paying attention because your energy and actions communicate that you're no longer accessible to the mediocre. And opportunities that once passed you by begin seeking you out because your elevated self-respect makes you stand out in rooms where most people settle. And the more you require from yourself, the more aligned opportunities rise to meet you, matching your new level of expectation. And this is the invisible law of standards. The internal always becomes external. And the higher your standards rise, the more your life aligns with the person you're becoming rather than the person you used to be. And in the end, requiring better is never about demanding perfection. It is about refusing to participate in anything that pulls you backward. And you learn that your life cannot expand if you are constantly shrinking to accommodate people who don't grow. And your standards become the compass that guides your decisions, your relationships, and your environment, creating a life rooted in intention rather than survival. And walking away isn't a threat. It's a filter that protects the version of you that's still under construction but deeply worth protecting. And as you continue choosing better, you begin attracting not what flatters your ego, but what strengthens your identity. And you stop being available to those who only want convenience while giving your energy to those who show commitment. And this alignment creates relationships built on respect, opportunities built on merit, and a life built on authenticity. And you discover that what you attract is a mirror of what you require. And what you require is a reflection of the value you place on yourself. And your standards tell the world who you are long before you ever have to explain it. And the world will always respond to the person you choose to be, not the person you wish you were. Walking away can feel like the most terrifying choice because it demands that you leave behind not just people, but versions of yourself that you clung to for far too long, and this level of honesty can be uncomfortable. And you realize that staying was easier because it allowed you to avoid confronting your fears of being alone, misunderstood, or starting over from scratch. But every time you choose to stay somewhere that diminishes your identity, you lose a piece of the courage you were meant to build. And walking away, then, becomes the act of reclaiming the parts of you that you silenced for the sake of belonging to the wrong places. And you begin to recognize that the cost of staying small is far greater than the cost of temporary loneliness, and in the quiet space you create by leaving, you learn how much noise you were tolerating and how much peace you were sacrificing. And your clarity sharpens because you finally have space to hear your own thoughts, not those shaped by someone else's expectations. And it is in that space that you start rebuilding your identity, not around approval, but around truth. And you see yourself not as someone who lost something, but as someone who finally stopped losing themselves. And walking away becomes the catalyst for rediscovering strength you didn't know you had. And most people fear losing relationships more than they fear losing their self-respect. But walking away helps you reverse that imbalance and place your value back in its rightful position. And you begin to understand that relationships built on your silence were never relationships built on respect. And letting them go becomes an act of liberation. And the loneliness that comes afterward is not a punishment. It is a cleansing, a reset that frees you from the emotional weight you carried for too long. And you discover that solitude is not a void but a mirror, showing you the parts of yourself you neglected while pouring into people who never reciprocated. And in this mirror, you meet the version of you that always existed but was buried under doubt, exhaustion, and unmet expectations. And you learn to differentiate between people who loved you and people who simply loved your compliance. And walking away filters your life with precision, removing what drains you and revealing what deserves to stay. And it teaches you that not everyone who exits your life is a loss. Many are lessons that refine your standards, and you slowly realize that the people who truly see you will never require you to shrink or apologize for your strength. And with each day you remain committed to this decision, your confidence begins to rebuild itself from the inside out. And as your inner strength grows, you start attracting relationships, opportunities, and environments that align with the person you're becoming rather than the person you used to be. And you communicate differently because your words now come from a place of clarity rather than confusion, from conviction rather than fear, and people respect you more, not because you demand it, but because your actions embody self-respect so consistently that it becomes impossible to ignore. And you stop over-explaining yourself, stop negotiating your boundaries, and stop accepting crumbs disguised as effort. And walking away has rewired your mindset to believe that what you deserve is not optional. It is the standard. And you move through life with a presence that signals strength, boundaries, and intention. And those who cannot meet that energy naturally distance themselves. And this distancing does not hurt the way it once did, because now you understand that alignment is more valuable than attachment. And you realize that your future requires space that could never exist if you continued holding on to what was limiting you. And every choice you make reflects a deeper commitment to building a life rooted in authenticity rather than fear. And in this evolution, you become someone who chooses themselves not out of ego, but out of integrity. And eventually, walking away stops feeling like an ending and starts feeling like a beginning. the beginning of a life defined by purpose, not pressure. And you discover that the courage to walk away is the same courage that will help you walk toward everything meant for you. And the people who enter your life now meet a version of you who knows their worth, honors their boundaries, and refuses to compromise their peace. And you carry yourself differently because you've learned that losing others is never as damaging as losing yourself. And your story becomes a reminder that the hardest decisions often lead to the most powerful transformations. And nothing grows you like choosing yourself when it would be easier to abandon yourself. And walking away becomes your proof that you are capable of rebuilding, of rising, and of choosing a life that reflects your true value. And it shows you that the right people will never fear your strength. They will rise to meet it and grow alongside it. And the more you embrace this truth, the more effortless it becomes to protect your energy, honor your path, and trust your own voice. And walking away is not the end of your story. It is the moment you stop living for acceptance and start living with intention. And it is in that choice that you finally reclaim the freedom, respect, and alignment you always deserved.